Well, this is the next part in our study of Colossians. This is usually titled The Supremacy of Christ, and so I'll read the section that I'm going to be speaking on today. This is from Colossians 1, verse 15 through 23. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, not moved from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you heard and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant. In this part of the letter, which is a love letter to the churches from God, Paul, inspired by the Holy Spirit, he started out with some of the good things, the great things that are happening in the church. And of course, now he begins to address some of the problems and the attacks that the church in Colossae will face and are facing right now. He says in this section that we have been redeemed, rescued from the forced service of the kingdom of darkness. But that does not mean that the king of darkness has given up. He hates God with a ferocity that has no description. He has lost you for eternity through your faith in Jesus Christ. But he and his servants want to keep you and all of us Christians as ineffective as possible. So now, in believing in the gospel and committing yourself to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, you are a soldier in the kingdom of light. If you grow into a powerful soldier with endurance and patience over your Christian life, you will bring others out of the dark kingdom and into this kingdom of light. So you now are a key figure in a cosmic struggle between God and his greatest enemy. And the evil one, like all kingdoms, has spies and agents working within the other army. As in every war, every battle situation, there is a direct confrontation that you have with the enemy. And then there's the subversion that goes on behind the scenes in every war, where spies and people are sent in to destroy the enemy from within. The evil one took the direct approach to the early church through persecution, murder, and tried to destroy them through a frontal attack. And then his second strategy, of course, was to infiltrate the church with false teachers who perverted the message of the gospel and destroyed the church from within. Now, the first false teachers grew into a movement that's known as the Gnostics today, but they were just in the beginning stages here in this, as Paul is writing Colossians. But they were able to weaken and destroy thousands of people and churches. Now, the spirit of the Gnostics, of the false teachers that were in the first century church, are in our churches today, and they have similar results. The Gnostics' basic philosophy broke down into things like that the world is bad, The spirit world, on the other hand, is good. The material world is under the control of evil, ignorance, and nothingness. And then some people have a divine spark trapped in them, and that alone can bring us out of this evil material world, is capable of redemption. Their teaching that was perverting the early church was that salvation would come through a secret knowledge in which certain individuals had the ability to bring people into their same understanding. And since a good God could not have created an evil world, the material world must have been created by an inferior, ignorant, or evil God. This God hides the truth from humans, but some humans, with a spark from the eternal, bring people back into the divine realm where they belong. As you read this part of Paul's letter to the Colossians, you can see that he's addressing some of these false teachings that are already in the church. He identifies the first principle in these attacks within the church about the material world. He says that it was not created by an evil God. Jesus Christ is the material image of the invisible God without the effects of the fall of man and sin. He is the firstborn over all creation. The second Adam, he's called in other books. He was involved in all creation. Everything was created with him in mind. He existed before the material creation, and his personality is the glue that holds all things in place. So Jesus is supreme and king over all kings on earth and of all authorities within the spirit realm. He is Lord over both the physical earth and the spiritual realms beyond the earth. Second, he says he is the head of the church, and the church is the visible body of Jesus on the earth. He is their brain and their will. Those Christians who are his disciples, who have set aside their bodies as a receptacle of his Holy Spirit, they are actually his hands and feet, his heart on the earth. And then he says he's also supreme over the dead. He experienced death and is the first resurrection from the dead. And one of the things the false teachers began to do is turn it into a spiritual resurrection rather than a real physical resurrection. And Paul is addressing this, that Jesus was a real man who with a real physical body, and that he died and he rose again from the dead, and he is the first of the resurrection that will include many more. This ensures his eternal and complete supremacy over all things, including the grave. And then Paul makes an interesting statement. He says, this made God happy. He was thrilled to see his sinless character being lived out among sinful men. He loved revealing himself fully so that people could really know him and how much he loves them. There's nothing evil about your body or God's creation. Because of all God's character was in Jesus, we can always know what God is like by looking at the record of Jesus' life and teachings. His perfection allowed him to reconcile us to God. His death will make all things right on earth and in the spiritual realm. His blood is the sacrifice to end all sacrifices, making peace between God and his rebellious creation, mankind. He makes a real point of this, that there's nothing evil about your bodies. You were enemies of God because of what you believed, because of what you believed, your behavior was evil. But now he says, you've been made right with God through your faith in the gospel, in Jesus Christ's sacrifice for you. That has reconciled you to God. It was by his physical body, through his real death, that he can present you to God. One, he says, holy in his sight. This is a sinless condition. And also I talked about earlier that holiness is not the complete absence of sin or mistakes. You're never going to be this perfect person that never messes up in your life. It means that you are set aside for a special purpose. You've committed your body and your mind to be a part of God's purposes on the earth. He says that his death reconciled you, made you holy in his sight. It also made you perfect without any blemishes. That when he looks upon you, he does not see your rebelliousness and your sin. He sees your obedience to believing and trusting in Jesus Christ. And he sees his Son and everything that pleases him about his Son in you. Then he says that leaves you free from accusation. You're like a person that's standing on trial, and the judge says, are there any more witnesses? And the prosecuting attorney says, no, that's all we've got. And this is what you're seeing here, is Paul saying, the evil one has nothing else to hold against you. Jesus Christ is taking care of everything. You are free from any accusations. Then he says, if you continue in this. Now, history is filled with traitors who change sides, help their former enemy. All soldiers have opportunities to become traitors. Benedict Arnold decided at one point, he was fed up with the way he was being treated. He went over to the English. What do you think would have happened if he would have, after America had won their independence, he would have said, apologized for giving away Fort Ticonderoga? You think they would have said, oh, come on, you can be part of our democracy. Well, glad to have you. We forgive you. No, of course not. When you rebel and give over your country to the enemy, there's no coming back. And this is not a case of where you're jumping into Christianity, jumping out, forgiven, back and forth. Once you become a part of this army, you are expected to be faithful. You're a soldier in an army. And if you desert it and go over to the other side, there's no coming back to it. And he's saying, continue in your faith. You have to continue in this. Then he finishes this section. He says, be established and firm, not moved from the hope held out in the good news of the gospel. And then he says an extraordinary thing, because he says it in the past tense. The gospel is being heard all over the world. Paul talks in the past tense as he has already been in heaven, in a vision, or he's not sure whether he was physically there or just a vision. He has seen the end of this message. He knows that he is a servant of this part of the kingdom, spreading the good news to every Gentile nation, which now we happen to live in a time where we're seeing that the words of Paul are literally have gone into every corner of the world. And he was intent in his lifetime of taking them as far as he possibly could to bring the good news that you can be reconciled to God and be friends with God, be holy and without blemish, perfect, with no accusation against you, to every possible person that could receive it. God bless you.